The handcuffs felt cold against Rebecca's wrists as she sat in the back of the police car, watching her own house grow smaller through the rear window. 20 minutes earlier, she had been making breakfast for her 73-year-old mother, Margaret, just like she did every morning. Now she was being charged with elder abuse and financial exploitation, charges that seemed to have materialized out of thin air. "This has to be some kind of mistake," Rebecca whispered to Officer Harrison, who glanced at her through the rearview mirror with a mixture of sympathy and professional detachment. "Ma'am, we're just following up on a report that was filed yesterday," he replied. "Someone called in claiming you've been mistreating your mother and stealing her money." Rebecca's mind raced. Yesterday had been ordinary. She'd taken her mother to her doctor's appointment, stopped by the pharmacy to pick up her medications, and they'd spent the evening watching old movies together. Margaret had seemed perfectly content, even laughing at the romantic comedies they'd enjoyed. There had been no signs of distress, no complaints, nothing that would suggest abuse. The police station was a blur of fluorescent lights and beige walls. Rebecca found herself in an interrogation room facing Detective Williams, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes but a stern expression. The detective placed a manila folder on the table between them. "Rebecca, I need to ask you some questions about your living situation with your mother," Detective Williams began. "According to the complaint we received, you've been financially exploiting Mrs. Margaret Chen and keeping her isolated from other family members." "That's absolutely ridiculous," Rebecca protested. "I moved in with my mother 2 years ago when she started having mobility issues. I help her with daily tasks, drive her to appointments, manage her medications. I'm her caregiver, not her abuser." Detective Williams opened the folder and pulled out several photographs. Rebecca's heart sank as she recognized images of her mother's bedroom, the kitchen, and the living room, all taken from angles that made the modest home look neglected and depressing. "These photos were provided by someone who claims to have witnessed the conditions your mother is living in," the detective explained. "There are also allegations that you've been withdrawing money from her accounts without permission and preventing her from seeing other family members." Rebecca stared at the photos, trying to understand how her comfortable, well-maintained home could be portrayed in such a negative light. The angle of her mother's bedroom made it look cramped and cluttered, when in reality it was simply filled with the lifetime of belongings Margaret treasured. The kitchen appeared dirty in the photograph, though Rebecca knew she had cleaned it thoroughly just the day before. "Who filed this complaint?" Rebecca asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer. "I can't reveal the identity of the complainant at this time," Detective Williams replied. "But they've provided detailed information about your mother's daily routine and financial situation. They claim Mrs. Chen has expressed fear about confronting you directly." As the questioning continued, Rebecca felt a growing sense of dread. Someone had been watching their home, documenting their lives, and building a case against her. The accusations were specific enough to be believable, yet twisted just enough to paint her as a predator rather than a devoted daughter. The detective asked about Rebecca's employment status, her mother's income sources, and the frequency of visitors to their home. Each question felt like another nail in a coffin Rebecca didn't even know was being built around her. "I work part-time as a freelance graphic designer so I can be available for my mother when she needs me," Rebecca explained. "She receives Social Security and a small pension from my father's job. I help her manage her finances because she asked me to. She has arthritis in her hands and finds it difficult to write checks or use the computer for online banking." Detective Williams made notes as Rebecca spoke, her expression remaining neutral. "The complainant alleges that you've isolated your mother from her other daughter. When was the last time your sister visited?" Rebecca's stomach dropped. "My sister Sarah lives in Portland. She visits maybe 3 or 4 times a year, usually for holidays. She calls Mom every few weeks. According to our information, your sister has attempted to visit more frequently, but has been turned away or told your mother is unavailable." "That's not true," Rebecca said, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "Sarah is always welcome in our home. Mom looks forward to her visits." But even as she said it, Rebecca began to remember the phone calls that had gone unanswered when she and her mother were out running errands. The couple of times Sarah had mentioned wanting to visit on short notice when Margaret was napping or not feeling well. Could those innocent circumstances have been misinterpreted? Or worse, deliberately misconstrued? The interview stretched on for what felt like hours. Detective Williams was thorough but not unkind, yet Rebecca could feel the walls closing in around her. Someone had orchestrated this complaint with careful precision, anticipating her explanations and preparing counter-arguments that painted her in the worst possible light. When the detective finally stood up, Rebecca's heart was pounding. "Am I being arrested?" she asked. "You're being released on your own recognizance for now," Detective Williams replied. "But there will be an investigation. Child Protective Services, in this case, Adult Protective Services, will need to evaluate your mother's living situation. You'll need to appear in court next week." As Rebecca walked out of the police station, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Sarah. "Heard about your arrest. Mom is safe with me now. We need to talk." Rebecca stared at the message, pieces of a terrible puzzle beginning to fall into place. She hurried to her car and drove home, but when she pulled into the driveway, she could see through the front window that the house was empty. Rebecca's hands trembled as she unlocked the front door and stepped into the eerily quiet house. The living room still smelled faintly of her mother's lavender perfume, but Margaret's favourite reading chair sat empty, her knitting basket beside it undisturbed. On the coffee table, Rebecca noticed her mother's medications were gone, all 5 prescription bottles that she carefully organised each morning. Her phone rang and Sarah's name appeared on the screen. "Where is she, Sarah?" Rebecca answered without preamble. "She's safe." Sarah's voice was calm, almost businesslike. "She's with me at a hotel downtown. We need to meet and discuss this situation." "What situation?" "The one where you had me arrested on false charges." Rebecca sank into her mother's chair, overwhelmed by the scent of lavender and the magnitude of what was happening. "False charges?" Sarah's tone shifted to incredulous. "Rebecca, I've been trying to get Mom away from you for months. Every time I call, you make excuses about why she can't talk. When I visit, you hover over her like a prison guard. And don't get me started on what you've been doing with her money." Rebecca closed her eyes, trying to process her sister's words. "I help her manage her finances because she asked me to. I've never taken a penny that wasn't for her care or household expenses. I have receipts for everything." "Really? Then explain why her savings account has been depleted by nearly $15,000 in the past year." The accusation hit Rebecca like a physical blow. That money went toward the bathroom renovation so she could use the shower safely, the new stair lift, her medical expenses that Medicare doesn't cover, and groceries and household supplies. Everything was legitimate and necessary. Without consulting her other daughter, without any oversight, Rebecca realized that Sarah had been building this case methodically. When was the last time you offered to help with any of Mum's expenses? When was the last time you asked about her medical needs or what she required to stay comfortable in her own home? There was silence on the other end of the line before Sarah responded. "I live in Portland, Rebecca. I can't be there every day like you can. But that doesn't mean I don't care about Mum's well-being." "Then why didn't you talk to me about your concerns instead of going to the police?" "Because every time I tried to discuss Mom's situation with you, you became defensive and shut down the conversation. You've created this bubble around her where only you have access. That's not healthy for an elderly person." Rebecca thought back to their phone conversations over the past few months. Had she been defensive? She remembered feeling frustrated when Sarah would question her decisions about their mother's care, especially since Sarah only visited a few times a year and wasn't dealing with the daily challenges of caring for an aging parent. "Sarah, I moved in with Mom because she needed help. She was struggling with her medications, she fell twice in the shower and she was becoming forgetful about paying bills. I didn't isolate her. I helped her maintain her independence in her own home. By taking control of every aspect of her life. By being there when she needed me. Rebecca's voice cracked with emotion. Do you know that she has physical therapy twice a week? That she has a book club that meets at the community centre every Thursday? That she volunteers at the animal shelter on Saturdays? Does that sound like someone who's been isolated? Sarah was quiet for a moment. The investigator I hired said, You hired an investigator? Rebecca interrupted. You've been having us watched. I hired someone to document Mom's living conditions because I was concerned about her welfare. The photos show our home from deliberately misleading angles, Rebecca said, her anger building. Did your investigator mention that Mom has a beautiful garden that she tends every morning? Did they mention that she cooks dinner with me 3 times a week because she enjoys it? Did they mention that her bedroom is full of her treasures because she likes being surrounded by her memories? Rebecca, this isn't about attacking you personally. This is about what's best for Mom. And you think what's best for her is to traumatize her by having her daughter arrested and then removing her from the home she's lived in for 40 years. Sarah's voice became quieter. I think what's best for her is to have options, to not be dependent on one person for everything. Rebecca stood up and walked to the kitchen, where her mother's coffee cup still sat in the sink from that morning. She does have options, Sarah. She chooses to stay here because this is her home. She chooses to have me help her because she trusts me. And yes, she chooses to spend her money on things that make her life better and safer. Well, those choices are going to be evaluated by the court now, Sarah said. Adult Protective Services is opening an investigation, and Mom will be staying with me until it's resolved. For how long? However long it takes. I've already contacted a lawyer about seeking guardianship. The word hit Rebecca like ice water. Guardianship would mean Sarah would have legal control over their mother's decisions, finances, and living arrangements. It would mean Margaret could be moved away permanently, possibly to Portland, away from her friends, her routines, her life. Sarah, please don't do this. If you have concerns, let's sit down together with Mom and discuss them. Let's find a solution that works for everyone. It's too late for that, Rebecca. The legal process has already started. Meet me at the Marriott downtown tomorrow at 2:00. Bring any financial records you have for Mom's accounts. My lawyer wants to review them. The line went dead, leaving Rebecca standing in her mother's kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life. The grocery list on the refrigerator, written in Margaret's careful handwriting, the photo of Rebecca's father on the windowsill, the small herb garden visible through the window that her mother had planted last spring. Rebecca sank into a kitchen chair and buried her face in her hands. In the space of one day, her life had been turned upside down. She was facing criminal charges, her mother had been taken away, and her sister was seeking legal control over the woman they both claimed to love. As the evening light faded through the kitchen window, Rebecca began to understand that this wasn't just a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a conversation. This was a calculated move, planned and executed with precision. But what she couldn't understand was why Sarah would go to such extremes instead of simply talking to her about her concerns. The house felt emptier than it ever had, and Rebecca realized she might never hear her mother's footsteps in the hallway again. The next afternoon, Rebecca arrived at the Marriott with a box of financial records, receipts, and medical documents. She had spent the sleepless night organizing every piece of paper that documented her mother's care over the past 2 years. Her hands were steady now. The shock had given way to determination. Sarah was waiting in the lobby with a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Attorney Mitchell. They found a quiet corner table, and Rebecca immediately noticed how tired her mother looked sitting beside Sarah. Margaret's usually bright eyes seemed confused and distant. "Mom," Rebecca said softly, reaching across the table to touch her mother's hand. "How are you feeling?" Margaret looked up with a weak smile. "I'm a bit confused, dear. Sarah says there are some problems with money. I don't understand why I can't go home." Sarah exchanged a look with her lawyer before speaking. "Mum, we're just making sure everything is sorted out properly. You're safe here with me." Rebecca opened her box and began laying out bank statements, receipts, and medical bills on the table. "Every transaction is documented here. The $15,000 Sarah mentioned was spent on Mom's bathroom renovation, $8,000 for the walk-in shower and grab bars, $3,000 for the stairlift installation. The rest went to medical expenses, groceries, and household maintenance." Attorney Mitchell examined the documents with professional detachment while Sarah looked increasingly uncomfortable. "These records appear quite thorough," he admitted. "Because I kept them thorough," Rebecca said. "I knew that managing Mom's finances was a big responsibility, so I documented everything." Margaret picked up one of the receipts and squinted at it. "This is from Dr. Patterson's office. I remember that appointment. It was for my arthritis injections. Rebecca drove me there because my hands were hurting too much to drive myself." "Mum, you don't need to worry about these details," Sarah said quickly. "But I do worry," Margaret replied, her voice gaining strength. "This is my money and my life you're discussing. Rebecca, why did the police come to our house yesterday? I was so frightened." Rebecca looked directly at Sarah. "Someone called the police and accused me of abusing you and stealing your money. They said I was keeping you isolated from family." Margaret's confusion deepened. "But that doesn't make sense. You take me to book club every Thursday. We go to the farmer's market on Saturdays. I have coffee with Eleanor next door twice a week." She turned to Sarah. "You know this, dear. I tell you about these things when you call." Sarah's composure began to crack. "Mum, I was concerned because every time I wanted to visit, Rebecca said you were busy or not feeling well." "Well, yes, sometimes I'm not feeling well," Margaret said matter-of-factly. "I'm 73 years old, and sometimes I am busy. Last month, when you wanted to visit, I had a doctor's appointment and then bridge club. Rebecca suggested you come the following weekend instead, and you said you couldn't." Attorney Mitchell cleared his throat. "Mrs. Chen, are you happy living with Rebecca?" Margaret looked surprised by the question. "Of course I'm happy. It's my home. Rebecca helps me with things I can't do anymore, but I still make my own decisions. Just last week, I decided to donate some of my old clothes to charity, and Rebecca drove me to the donation centre." "And your finances? Are you comfortable with how they're being managed?" "Rebecca shows me the bank statements every month. We go over them together. I'm the one who decided to renovate the bathroom after I slipped in the old tub. I'm the one who wanted the stair lift so I could safely get to my bedroom upstairs. These were my choices." Sarah leaned forward. "Mum, I just want to make sure you have all the support you need. Maybe it would be better if you lived closer to me in Portland, where I could help more." Margaret's expression became firm. "Sarah, I appreciate your concern, but I don't want to live in Portland. My friends are here. My church is here. My life is here. If you want to help more, you're welcome to visit more often or call more frequently. But I don't need to be rescued from my own daughter." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of truths being acknowledged. Attorney Mitchell gathered the financial documents and handed them back to Rebecca. "Based on these records and Mrs. Chen's testimony, I don't see evidence of financial exploitation or abuse." Sarah stared at the table. I was worried that you were worried," Margaret said gently. "But you didn't talk to me about your worries. You assumed things that weren't true." Rebecca watched her sister struggle with the realization of what she had done. "Sarah, I understand that it's hard being far away when Mom needs care. I've never tried to exclude you from decisions about Mom's well-being. If you had concerns, I wish you had talked to me directly." "I did try," Sarah said quietly, "but it felt like you had everything under control, and I felt unnecessary." "You're not unnecessary," Margaret said firmly. "You're my daughter, and I love you. But so is Rebecca, and she's been taking wonderful care of me. This isn't a competition." Attorney Mitchell stood up. "Mrs. Chen, given what I've observed today, I would advise against pursuing guardianship proceedings. It's clear that you're competent to make your own decisions and that your current living arrangement is working well for you. Over the following weeks, the criminal charges against Rebecca were dropped when the investigation found no evidence of abuse or financial exploitation. Adult Protective Services closed their case after interviewing Margaret extensively and finding her to be safe, well cared for, and living according to her own wishes. Sarah returned to Portland, but she began calling more frequently and visiting every other month instead of just on holidays. The sisters slowly rebuilt their relationship, with Margaret serving as the bridge between them. Sarah eventually apologized for her actions, admitting that her fear of losing her mother had clouded her judgment and led her to make assumptions instead of asking questions. Margaret continued to live in her own home with Rebecca's support, tending her garden, attending her book club, and making her own decisions about her life and care. The experience had been traumatic, but it had also clarified something important for all three women. That love sometimes means trusting the people you care about to know what's best for themselves, even when it's not what you would choose for them. Rebecca learned to be more open about including Sarah in discussions about their mother's care, while Sarah learned that caring for someone doesn't always mean controlling their choices. And Margaret, despite being the centre of the conflict, proved to be the strongest of them all, firmly advocating for her right to live her life on her own terms, surrounded by the people and places she loved most.
Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more interesting content coming soon.